Hello? It has not been that long since I released the last video, well, considering the frequency at which I post stuff. And if you have seen it, you will understand why I wanted to post this one as soon as possible. Even though it's not restoration related, it has its uses here, since it's focused on creating a painting itself. As the coincidence had it, I was asked by my mother to paint her a painting where Madonna would be depicted. As I'm more of a restorer than I am an artist, I decided to go for a copy of a painting, and I chose Giulio Cesare Procaccini's Madonna and Child with Saint Francis and Dominic and Angels. As the time was very limited for this, it wasn't a technological copy but a free interpretation instead, where I only tried to apply the general concept of layering and steps I showed in the last video, the underdrawing, the underpainting and the paint layer. The painting still could use some glazing, but I didn't do it this time because of the time constraints. I will be only using a store-bought white prime canvas, and there will be no focus on pigment choice, strictly bound by the era when the original was created, which was year 1612. The Copy Old Masters is a very good way to practice your craftsmanship or your ability to paint realism. In order to do that well though, you have to either see the original live or at least have a very high resolution photo reproduction at your disposal. I had neither of those for this project. Anyway, here goes. Here I am using the color for the background, as the pure white is simply not great for this sort of painting. I opted for raw sienna, which I pre-mix with liquid medium to achieve the right consistency for application with a white brush, as I want to apply this in a thin layer. The choice here is quite important, as with the layered paintings, this color will influence how the following layers appear. This is something that is called imprimatura, which comes from Italian, and it literally means the first layer. It provides with a transparent toned ground, which will allow light falling onto the painting to reflect through the paint layers. And no, it wasn't used with the Procaccini's original, as they probably used the bold ground layer instead. As I wanted an even distribution, I used a piece of cloth to smudge away the brush strokes. After the first pass, I didn't really like the colors, so I added some burnt sienna on top. For the underdrawing, I'm using charcoal, which is very easy to work with, although it is quite messy. As you can see, I have the reference on my phone to help me sketch the outline of the image. Of course, you can use a projector to make it faster and more precise. If you don't have one, grid is also an option, but doing this with freehand helps you practice your drawing skills and makes you think about the subject you are trying to depict. And the point here is not to be super precise, but it will save you some work when you start with the underpainting. Now, before starting with oil paint, you need to stabilize the charcoal, and there couldn't have been a worse timing to run out of fixative, so a regular hairspray will have to suffice. Having done that, we proceed to the underpainting. Green is quite important when imitating human skin tone. When you look at Italian frescoes, you learn the term verdaccio, which refers to color used for defining tonal values, forming a complete monochromatic underpainting. It was often a mixture of black, yellow and white pigment, which resulted in greyish, yellowish or greenish tone. In oil painting, a similar technique called the dead layer was used, often by Flemish painters. As for the colors, I used a combination of raw umber, viridian and lead white for flesh tones. The lead white is something you will probably not be able to get in general art supply stores, as it has been banned due to its toxicity. But the difference compared to the now available titanium white or zinc white is quite noticeable, especially when trying to achieve the effects of impastos as they did in the past. Of course, it also depends on the quality of colors you are using and the medium for painting. But if you were to choose between titanium and zinc, use titanium, as zinc is semi-transparent, which is not something you want at this stage. The parts that are generally darker, like areas that are covered in shadow due to the modulation of the objects and where the light in the image is coming from, I try to use as little or none of the white if possible, with the raw umber and such quite diluted in medium. For the bright parts where the light is at its strongest, you want to use quite a big proportion of the undiluted white, and the brighter the area, the less frugal you are with the colors. This creates the contrast and a better illusion of space. I pay almost no attention to detail at this point. using wider brushes to cover more area at once, but continuously thinking about what it is that I'm trying to depict, focusing on the shape and proportions. With a similar logic, I continue with the rest of the image, clothes and the background. Although the mix I use for those is slightly different. For example, this cloak is blue in the original, and the best way to achieve modulation for blues is with a black and white or brown underpainting, like burnt umber here. For the red parts of the clothes, I used a subdued reddish tone of raw sienna and yellow ochre for the color. There is no rule here that tells you what will create the best result. Of course, only under the assumption you are not doing a technological copy. So doing this with a bit of instinct is preferable. Now with the underpainting finished, I proceed to the main paint layer. In this case, I started with the blue cloth simply because it is the most on the left, and me being right-handed means I avoid accidentally smudging the freshly laid color. I used a combination of ivory black, ultramarine and Prussian blue. Considering the date of the original, they could have used azurite, lapis lazuli or indigo. Earth pigments used in the underpainting were much cheaper compared to the pigments like lapis lazuli, also called ultramarine, an ounce of which was equivalent to an ounce of gold, so you can imagine they didn't want to be lavish with it. This problem stopped around the beginning of the 19th century with the discovery of its cheaper synthetic substitute, much like one we use today. Similarly as with the blue, I continued with the red, only using a combination of transparent red oxide and vermilion, with the underpainting showing through substantially more. You could say this part was partially done as glazing. The point of the underpainting is to utilize it with the following layers, which means there is no need to paint all over every area with each subsequent layer. For example, as for the areas in the shadow, sometimes you let the underpainting show through completely or use glazing at the end when finishing. For the penumbras or the parts where shadows turn into light, you might use more opaque color. For the bright areas, you add even more color in volume, often undiluted, and the highlights are best painted with the heavier impastos. But the amount of color you lay onto canvas is not the only thing to keep in mind. The colors need to work in harmony. Terms like hue, value, and chroma might be important to look into. Hue refers to the actual color of a pigment. It represents the pure color without any white, black, or gray added. Do not confuse it with the name given to a specific color by its manufacturer though. In this case, it could mean a paint in the tube is of lesser concentration of a pigment, or different pigments were used together. When we talk about value, we talk about darkness and lightness of the colors, how much of white or black is added to the color. The hue is not taken into consideration here, so you might as well be thinking about it in grayscale. The problem of color's value or tone is that how light or dark we perceive it is also influenced by what is around it. The same value might appear much brighter or darker depending on the background, for example. And to complicate it even more, then there is chroma, which refers to the purity of hue, or the saturation and the intensity of the color. Although it is sometimes very difficult to separate value from chroma, as the light colors seem to look more intense than they really are. To slightly help you imagine what it looks like in reality, take a look at these two images that represent this theory quite well. And then there is the need to be able to differentiate between warm and cool colors. This is especially important as alternating between these two also helps in creating the effect of realism. If you have cool shadows, then the bright parts should be on the warm side and vice versa. As you go further and further with the layers, you need to be more and more deliberate with the brush strokes, as accidentally adding a wrong tone may end up in breaking the painting apart. So, as you progress with the painting, you spend more time looking and mixing the color than you actually spend on painting. I know most of you come here for the restoration videos, but I wanted to talk a bit about creating of a painting itself, as this was one of the things we as restorers had to understand both theoretically and practically before we could actually do any restoration at all. And I think it has been enough rambling for now, so I would like to thank you for coming here. Hopefully you enjoyed this video so far. There is a few more minutes of painting only, so if you persist, you will see how this painting turned out at the end. Until next time, bye!